Hi everyone! Today I'm going to talk a little bit about a presentation that I just attended this morning, and in light of Remembrance Day, it's very fitting to talk a little bit about our freedoms. And so if you like the presentation today, please share it with your friends. Please subscribe to the channel. Please hit the notification button. Hi everyone! Remembrance Day is just around the corner, and it is a day that has some significance to me, having obviously worked with many of our military men and women over the years, and having direct experience with some of the people who have served overseas. It certainly brings a certain perspective to the freedoms and the comforts, the security that we enjoy in a country like Canada. But I attended this morning a presentation by a retired veteran, Mr. Tex Lugner, who had asked me to come and listen to his presentation that he presented to at one of the local schools. The stories that he had to share and the stories that he had to tell were hard to hear, to be honest, because I think we've forgotten a little bit about the sacrifices that people have had to make in order for us to enjoy the freedoms and the security that we have today in the West in particular. One of the things that he really mentioned was the role of peacekeepers throughout the world and over time, and how Canada played a very large role in peacekeeping and the pride we used to take in that. And it was a United Nations initiative for peacekeepers. But in his own words, peacekeeping was a myth. It wasn't what people believed it to be. And that posed for me a question as to what does it mean to say, lest we forget? Is it we don't forget the men and women who died? Of course it is. But I think it's much bigger than that. I think lest we forget needs to reflect more on the intention as to the why, actually, the why they died. What was it that was so important to them, so important to us then as a country, that we were willing to put our lives on the line to defend it? We were willing to lose our fathers, brothers, sisters to defend. So what exactly is that? What were we trying to defend? And I think the quick answer and the easy answer is freedom. But what does it mean today to be free? What does it mean to be a democracy? What does it mean to be a country that is represented supposedly by the people? So one of the things that Tex really focused on was the United Nations. And what is the United Nations? The United Nations is a group of countries that have come together and they consult with one another and develop policies and non-binding, supposedly. But for what purpose? The majority of the countries that represent the United Nations are not free societies. They're not free countries. They're not democratic in any way, shape, or form. Most of them are dictatorships, rulers, and we somehow are taking our orders from them. So this was one of the things that he tried to bring to the attention of these kids this morning that he was talking to. And he talked about, at one point, we used to know who our enemy was. It was very easy when we had the Cold War, because it was the West versus Russia, for example. We knew the enemy. When World War II, we knew the enemy. World War I, we knew the enemy. Today, when you go to a place like Afghanistan and you have children who walk up to you, soldiers are faced with, is this the enemy or is this just a child? And we have changed the rules of engagement. We have changed the rules around war and how wars are being fought. They are terrorists at And that can be anybody. So he talked about PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, for our veterans. He talked, and I'm going to talk in relation to my own personal experience. I remember going to work one day and seeing this man on a bench in Ottawa. And it was cold, and he's curled up, and I just figured this must be somebody who's homeless, somebody who's obviously drunk, or you make up all these things in your mind. And as I learned, however, this was one of our most decorated military personnel. And text referenced some of the atrocities that peacekeepers had to witness. And they had to witness them because they were under direct orders by the United Nations not to engage, not to interfere. And he talked about the stress and the pain and the hardship, of these people who had to sit there and watch these atrocities, murder, of women, children, rape of women, children. And the one thing for me when I listened to him speak was, why would anybody send a group of soldiers into a place where, from a peacekeeping perspective, they're not allowed to keep the peace? So one of the comments he made was that peacekeeping is a myth. And maybe that's true, because why would any organization send a group of individuals, soldiers in particular? We have to train our soldiers to fight. It's not, I don't think, innate in human nature, not a healthy human being anyway, to ever want to point a gun at somebody and pull the trigger. And so why do we have a group of individuals who are now sent to a country where there is no civility, and they're warring, fighting with one another? One group hates another group, and they're killing each other. And are they just there to bear witness? If that's the case, why? Why would we put our men and women in harm's way and force them to watch these types of atrocities at their own peril? When they come home, you can't just erase those memories. So I challenge everybody, think about what we're trying to accomplish. And sometimes good intentions are not enough. And sometimes when we don't understand who the enemy is, we sometimes don't recognize maybe the real enemy. Because I think today freedom in the West is under attack. And I think we have bureaucrats, politicians who don't, maybe through good intention, yes, try to set policy and try to do things to protect. But I think people need to realize that freedom needs to be protected on an individual level. So these men and women, World War I, World War II, went to peacekeeping missions. They all went for the purpose of protecting something and fighting for something. And that something was freedom. And today, we, I think, have let that freedom muscle, if we can call it that, atrophy quite a bit. Because we've taken it for granted over the last 30, 40 years, because we haven't had an adversary necessarily that has threatened that so-called freedom. But yet today, when you look at some of the policies that are coming down from our own government, and they're chipping away at these little freedoms. The Income Tax Act is a perfect example. When it was initially established, it was 45 pages. Now it's almost 4,500 pages. Is that freedom? Is that what these men and women died for? When you look at regulations, at one time, my grandfather built his own house from top to bottom. He built his own house. He wired his own house. He put the windows in his own house. He plumbed his own house. Now, he had help from his community and people who knew what they were doing. But he didn't have to ask permission to do that. He didn't have to get permits to do that. He didn't have to pay the government. At one time when we wanted to get married, men and women fell in love, or it was convenient. They were going to have a family. So, they, under the guise of union, usually through the church, not even through the government. Now today you have to have permission from the government, a marriage certificate to get married. And top that off with, okay, it's not working out, we're going to go our separate ways. You have to have permission from the government to get unmarried. a divorce. So I look at, are we really free today? And how is it that these people then, who had far more freedoms than we do, they fought, they died, they sacrificed a tremendous amount for us to have those freedoms, and yet we willingly give them up to the government or to another entity? Why would we do that? And I think we've become conditioned, and it's become almost accepted practice that this is indeed the case because, well, for some people, it's all they've ever known. But is that freedom? I think if there's any one thing today that we need to reestablish is what is freedom and who's responsible for preserving it. Is it our military men and women? Is it the government? Or is it you and I? Because when in reality, only you and I, people, everyday people, can preserve freedom. And that means we have to start exercising that freedom muscle again. It's atrophied. We need to start, little bit by little bit, reasserting it and taking back responsibility for ourselves and acknowledging that it's not the government's responsibility. The government is representative of us. And if we want to remain a free society, then we are the ones that have to preserve and defend and fight for freedom. And that means every time somebody challenges a little bit of our freedom, we have to push back and say, no, that's our freedom, our responsibility. We'll preserve it, we'll defend it, we'll protect it. Thank you.